As the global energy crisis continues, gas prices in Europe have jumped to a point more than 10 times their normal level. At the same time, investors appear to be more pessimistic about the economy of Germany, the engine of Europe, than any time since the eurozone debt crisis a decade ago. How are European countries coping with record-breaking inflation and the recession fears, both individually and as a bloc? And what implications does the EU's economic distress have for the rest of the world? To find out more, I'm joined by Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department for European Studies of the China Institute of International Studies, Dr. William Li, Chief Economist of the Milken Institute, and Professor Ian Beck from the London School of Economics and Political Science. That's our topic. I'm Xu Jianduo. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So, Ian, I will start with you. Tuesday saw prices of natural gas in Europe jump by as much as 10%, which seems to have caused a lot of concern about the potential damage to the health of the economies in Europe. So, how serious is the shortage of the energy or the gas prices skyrocketing there?
Well, right now, it doesn't matter greatly because it's the middle of a heat wave and there's much less use of gas than there would normally be in a winter period. But the great fear is that Europe will not be able to top up its reservoirs of gas, partly because it's competing on the world market for LNG, partly because Vladimir Putin has suspended or reduced the deliveries of gas, except to his friends like Hungary, to whom he's increased it. So the fear is not immediate. It's what's going to happen when gas demand starts to rise. And this could see major difficulty in a number of European economies which are heavily dependent on Russian gas. The big unknown, clearly, is what Putin will do next.
Okay, William, look, if the shortage of energy has been there for many months, let's say. I mean, for livelihoods, for people on the daily lives, they can feel probably the impact of the shortage. What about its impact on the industrial production?
Oh, it has a huge impact because, take for example, Germany, which is the industrial powerhouse for the euro area. It is very energy dependent, and for its chemical industry, gas is a very vital component of a lot of its intermediary output that is used in the global industrial supply chain. So the industrial side of Europe is very vulnerable to these high gas prices.
Mm-hmm. And what about the delivery, say, or the transportation of gas, natural gas from the U.S.? In trying to replace, let's say, the absence of the gases from Russia.
That's a great point. In fact, that has been the stopgap I think that Europe is trying to depend on as a way of making up for the kind of shortages that Ian just mentioned. One of the things that I should point out, though, is that most of the European countries have become so dependent on the pipelines of natural gas from Russia that even with increased shipments of liquefied natural gas from the United States, there isn't a lot of infrastructure to receive the gas. So there are blockages and bottlenecks in the delivery system, so that the key important priority now for all of Europe is to develop more port facilities to be able to receive the supplies of liquefied natural gas from the United States.
So that is probably time-consuming, But Ian, if you look at the economic performance, a report from Eurostat, the EU Statistics Office, for last month showed that the EU's economy grew at 4% in the second quarter when compared to the same time last year, and 0.6% compared to the first quarter. So what do you make of those numbers? Seems, the economy is still growing, right?
Well, the clue is in the word second. That's the quarter that finished in June. The expectation was that this year, 2022, would be a year of further rebound from the COVID shutdowns. There was a reasonable growth performance in 2021. It was expected to accelerate in 2022. So although the headline figure might be the 4% comparing the same quarter with last year, the next stage, the next semester of this year is going to be the real downturn when the effects of the high gas prices start to hit. And if you look further in the Eurostat forecasts, what you see is they say, yes, we did well in the second quarter, but we're now downgrading our expectations for the second half of 2022 and for 2023. And that's also contingent on what happens with the gas supply. If there was a real shortage of gas, then the hit to the European economy could be much more considerable.
William, to you, can the Q2 economic data ease the concern or the fear of recession in the European countries?
Not at all. In fact, the high growth numbers you cited are historical backward-looking numbers. All of Wall Street right now and the global financial markets are looking forward, and everyone is pretty much convinced that Europe will be in a recession for the second half of this year and into next year.
William, if the European economy is go into a recession for the second half of this year, what does that look like? What do people feel like? Okay, now we are in the recession. In what way that will affect people's lives?
Well, this particular recession is also accompanied by these enormously rapidly rising prices. So it's really a stagflationary environment. And what you see as part of daily European life now that's growing are the number of work stoppages and strikes out there. So we are getting back to the era of the 1970s where we have the beginnings of what is known as the wage price spiral. Labor demanding to have their real wages restored to them, and at the same time, companies having to raise prices to make up for the decline in productivity. And so Europe now is at the beginning of the worst of all possible worlds, the stagflationary environment that gets into expectations of stagflation, and that continues a wage price spiral that makes gives policymakers a nightmare.
Mm-hmm. So Ian, that's a challenging state. You have, on the one hand, you want to fight the inflation, which stood at 8.9% in July. And probably the European Central Bank needs to do more to hike the interest rates, to continue to do it in September in order to fight inflation. But at the same time, you want to stimulate the economic growth, right?
Well, we comment a lot on the fact that there was a large increase in the European Central Bank rate, 50 basis points, but that only took it to zero. And a 0% interest rate in a time when you have an inflation of around 8.5% to 9% means a negative real interest rate, which in theory should stimulate the economy quite a bit. The European Central Bank is going to have to do more. But what's now being expected is that inflation is maybe reaching its peak unless the wage price spiral that William alluded to takes hold. And I think there's an understanding in many European countries that it's imperative to prevent that happening. One rosy feature of the European economy is relatively low unemployment and relatively high employment, because the employment rate has been increasing, the employment level has been going up, and it's a bit of a paradox coming out of the COVID effects and looking at what's happening to the GDP to see employment doing so well.
Well, the good thing probably, Ian, we can allude to is even with a 50% base point increase, the rate is zero, so you can continue to increase, to hike the interest rate. There's still room to do that. That's for sure, right? But at the same time, if your priority is fighting the inflation, but the inflation comes from the shortage of gas, shortage of energy, right? It's not really about sure, it's about the price, but it's not about you have too much liquidity in the market.
Well, it's not a liquidity problem. It's an imported inflation problem, because the inflation that's being generated across Europe, including the United Kingdom, same in the United States, stems from primarily the rise in energy prices. And that's not something which the conventional tools of monetary policy, particularly raising interest rates, are that well equipped to deal with. Instead, what the policy priority has to be to preventing the kind of wage price spiral that William mentioned earlier, because that's the thing that would cause stagflation to be entrenched. And therefore, I think that the central bankers in Europe and elsewhere will be banking on the expectation that inflation has reached its peak. The next stages of inflation, particularly with base effects from starting from this year, should be for it to decline gently, and hope that the wage effect doesn't take hold in a way which would perpetuate the inflation.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hongjian, welcome to the show. If you look at the economy, for example, Germany, the largest in the European continent, Many people also fear that there will be recession, and also investors are not that optimistic about the future, the prospect. As William has pointed out, is also connected with the global economy because Germany is strong with export, is strong with manufacturing, but it recorded the first monthly deficit in May. So what does that mean to the German economy?
Also, we know that the German economy is one of the strongest economy in the European continent, and of course, not only its size of the, especially the trade and also investment. Also, we know even from the industry issue, Germany dominated. I mean, a lot of the also we know industries in Europe, in other European countries, especially its manufacturing factors like the also we know the automobile, and also vehicle or some other, even the chemical industry and so on. So now the bigger problem for German economy is it's not only the issue of Germany, and it's also the issue of European economy, especially eurozone economy. Another very, very important issue related to the German economy is also, as the biggest contributor of budget in European Union. Once there are some more problem, especially for this balance of, trade or some other finance problem, they will give a very, very big impact negatively to the eurozone, especially its financial support. Also, especially now, there are not of the expenditure from European Union, not only for its also the fund for the COVID-19 and also its assistance to Ukraine in this conflict. So yes, German economy will be in the heart of European economy, and also once there are some problem for German economy, certainly there will be very, very big spillover effect to other European countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ian, obviously, as we said about inflation, 60% of that comes from the energy shortage. Is there any possibility, some economists from Germany are suggesting probably Germany needs to normalize the relationship with Russia, so gas supply will be resumed. Any chances of that?
It doesn't look very likely that there will be any relaxation of the policy on Russia. Russia, in some senses, is holding Germany to ransom. Germany's response already is to postpone the closure of some of its nuclear generating facilities. It's going to be looking around for ways of cutting energy use. These are short-term measures that the Germans are taking. If you look 2 or 3 years ahead, there's going to be a huge acceleration in ending the dependence on Russia through renewable energies, through trying to get deals with other parts of the world, whether it's Algeria, the United States, Qatar, Australia, anywhere else. So this is a short-term problem, which is going to cause damage, especially if it's a cold winter. Will cause damage to the German manufacturing, as has already been mentioned by the other speakers. But I think it's something that Europe can manage better than we sometimes assume. My fear is not so much Germany, it's Italy, because the Italian economy is in great difficulty already. It's subject to political instability because the government of Mario Draghi fell and is likely to be replaced by a right-wing alliance, which will find it quite difficult to govern for the whole country. And yes, at the same time, there are other small countries in Europe which are booming away, Ireland, Estonia, the other Baltic countries. So it's a very mixed picture across Europe.
Mixed picture across Europe. William, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the great vulnerabilities of the whole euro area experiment, is to try to have one policy, one monetary policy for a huge set of heterogeneous, very different countries. And the southern belt, Italy, Greece, and so on, have traditionally been the difficulties and vulnerabilities for Europe, and this energy shortage has shown just how much more vulnerable it is.
Well, speak of the winter, a cold winter. So what are the responses? What can countries do probably to say, survive the winter, and then of course they will focus on the renewables or other sources instead of Russia. But that will take time, right, William?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I am not as optimistic as Ian is in terms of alternative sources of energy. It takes a long time to have a country or a continent switch over to these alternative sources. And look at what's happening this summer. The winds have died down. The summer heat has been unusually high. The rivers have dried up. So much of the alternative energy sources themselves are vulnerable to nature itself. So I think going forward, it's going to be very difficult. And the best thing that Europe can do right now is to get back to reliable energy sources, like getting infrastructure in place for natural gas deliveries and perhaps nuclear power to get less of that green imperative to shift away from nuclear and go back to more reliable sources.
Hong Yan, in terms of country-to-country level here, do you also, are you also more concerned with Italy than, say, Germany?
I think between Germany and Italy, they do play a very different role in a European economy. And also, certainly, there will be very different consequences once there are some more problem with their two economies. Also, just like I mentioned before, that Germany to play a role as a so-called dynamic or driving force for the European economy. Another issue about the Italian economy, also, the big concern about the Italian economy is how about its debts? How about the situation of the maybe come back another kind of the the eurozone debt crisis? Also, even now, because of the political chaos, so I think there will be more and more very, very visible problem or situation for this more concern about the also the possible damage of any uncertainties of the Italian politics and the economy. So once something happens in that way, I think it will give another very, very big problem on European economy. Now also, even after more than 1 decade, still the eurozone and especially the European Central Bank always take care about the any kind of possible risk of this comeback of the debt crisis. So I think that the September will be very, very important time, not only for Italian politics and also for European economy.
Speaking of politics, Yim, if you look at Germany, they are discussing the possibility of rationing gas use. Governments from London and Madrid are preparing to subsidize these skyrocketing utility bills. So, I mean, probably there will be a political impact too on many of these governments over there, like in Germany or maybe Italy and in the UK.
It's a difficult one to judge because if you have a threat to the country as a whole, it quite often rallies the population behind the government and says, right, we're all in this, we all have to find a way of solving it. If the government is seen to make mistakes, and some of what the new Prime Minister of Germany, new Chancellor of Germany has done over the period since his elevation to the office nearly a year ago, has been judged badly by his citizens. So I think that the big question is going to be, can the political leaders lead? The key word is lead. Show that there is a necessity to make changes. Some of those changes will be moderately painful. For example, there was a story in the press a few days ago about people in Hamburg having cold showers rather than hot showers. Now that seems almost frivolous, but it's a way of saving energy. Lowering your heating from 22 degrees to 20 degrees is a way of saving energy. There are a number of ways in which a government which leads can persuade its population to try to cope with this. Germany has also made the decision, as I mentioned earlier, to prevent the immediate closure of its 3 existing nuclear facilities. That too is a way of coping with this. It breaks a taboo of the government, particularly a government which involves a Green Party. So it is to me conceivable that you'll see major political changes as part of the way this unfolds.
So, William, I mean, even the government, probably all the government leaders, they try to present an image or they try to lead the nation during the time of a crisis. But there's also an issue of creating this the right policy, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the European leadership has been trying to lead the various economies for decades now, and you see that has led to huge pileups of debt, which will be subject to even higher interest rates now that the global economy is starting to push interest rates up to combat inflation. So the leaders around all of European countries and around the world are going to have a difficult time convincing people to sacrifice when we are constrained by their policies. One point that Ian mentioned is very important to point out, is that the supply side approach is absolutely critical for countries like Germany and UK and the powerhouse of production in Europe, because that is the possibility of improving productivity.
Hong Jian, obviously there are tough challenges for the European leadership, basically for every country, during the winter in particular. And then can people expect that things will get better in the spring?
I hope so, anyway. So I think that this winter will be a very decisive time for European economy, for European politics. As we know now, I think it depends on some very, very important indexes. One of them is how about the, as we know, energy reserve for most of European countries. Now, of course, very, very obvious index is how about the German situation. Now it looks like more than 30%. I mean, already the gas reserve for the Germany already. I think it's good news anyway. But now the also a very big challenge for Germany is could it keep the gas reserve to 90% or 95% before the November? So as we know, once there is the reach of the goal of the gas reserve, certainly it will give a very, very big news to the market. Another, I think, a very important project for European countries is how could Europe to get some more cooperation, not only within and also with other partners, including China, United States, and some other regions. As we know so far, especially the security of supply chain and the industry chain give a very, very big concern to European countries. Once there are some more protectionism from European countries or from other economies, certainly I think it will give a very, very bad impact on European countries. So from this winter to spring, very, very tough time, and also very, very decisive time for European, even for its economic structure. As we know, once there is not any energy supply from Russia, how could about the German economy and some other European country, they needed to change maybe totally their economy structure. I think that's a very, very big challenge ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, tough time ahead. So, Ian, of course, we are talking about this with the assumption that Russia will basically shut off the supply through the pipes of gases, to Germany and other countries in the European continent. But at the same time, the European countries are exploring other alternative sources, for example, in the Middle East. Any progress in that front?
Yes, there has been real progress, and particularly for Italy, which has been doing deals with the likes of Algeria and Qatar. There was an item in the British press this morning saying that a liquefied natural gas ship has just arrived from Australia to dock in the UK. And there are connectors between the UK and continental Europe, which I think will be used in spite of Brexit. There is still the physical infrastructure to share gas among the European countries, including the UK. So I think that there is a possibility that there will be some contribution to alleviate the worst damage that Putin tries to do. But it's also not a certainty that Putin will cut off the gas. After all, he requires the revenue from the gas. And although he's benefited from the rising gas price, which means every unit he sells is getting him more money, there will come a time where that will turn. because the alternative supplies will be coming in. The big question is when that happens.
Yeah,
Can Europe survive this winter, in which case it's going to be far better placed to deal with the following winter, or will it really struggle this winter? That, to me, is the unknown question.
right, the political interests or economic interests, which comes first, or long-term consideration. Shift to the currency here, William, the euro, which touched the parity with the U.S. in recent weeks. Long-term prospect for euro, is it going probably stronger or weaker or more or less the same?
Well, one of the issues that's always plagued Europe has been sustained high growth. When I was at the IMF, everyone used to cheer European growth going above 2% because that was considered a big boom for Europe. And so the structural rigidities in Europe still have to be dealt with. They've been dealt with a lot already, but there's a lot of mileage to go. One of the things that keeps the euro weak is the fact that the ECB is so far behind the Fed and other central banks around the world in raising its interest rates. And the reason given by the ECB is that they're concerned about fractionalizing the debt, the financial system there because of the vulnerabilities in Europe compared to the less vulnerabilities in Northern Europe. So I think one of the things that keeps the euro in a state of demise and uncertainty and is not well regarded by a lot of international investors is the fact that the European monetary policy is constrained in how much it can catch up with the Fed, and also the structural rigidities of low growth plaguing Europe that's been there for decades.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hong Jian, briefly, say the loss of values of the euro, is that a good thing or bad thing to the European economy, to the eurozone economy, let's say, more specifically?
Anyway, it depends. As we know, usually weak value of the euro usually will be good for its foreign trade. But on the other hand, is how about now, especially for European countries to purchase more energy? Also, we know the weak euro will promote this price of the energy to some degree. So I think now the big question for euro and also for eurozone economy is, firstly, how to keep the stability of this of euro, and then how could European countries to deal with more? I mean, it's a challenge from the energy price. So I think once something get done, certainly there will be a stable situation between euro and some other international currencies.
With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Xinduo. See you next time.